Hey, Dr. C here with you. So I got a question recently as to whether or not Brazil nuts could cause hair loss. Apparently there was an article saying that one could be at risk for selenium toxicity by consuming Brazil nuts, and selenium toxicity can cause hair loss. So it would be something to be wary of and be thoughtful of. And I got this question and it made me take notice. I really thought it through. So in a lot of my old writings, I've talked forever about the benefits of Brazil nuts. In my oldest writings, I was cautious about saying, one or two. And my thought was, I was aware that the amount of selenium that they had can be highly variable. You can get some batches with much more than others. And I've always been aware that selenium can be toxic in high amounts. So there's benefits to Brazil nuts, and they're a version of selenium that's really well absorbed, but I too was concerned about someone getting too much. And this question that came in probably a couple of years ago now made me dig really deeply into this. And so I looked at the whole thing, and we have a condition called selenosis, which is selenium toxicity. I actually diagnosed a case of that myself back in the late 90s. A gentleman was taking really high doses of antioxidant pills, and they were labeled as having far more selenium than you would expect per pill. And he was taking a lot of those pills, and he had symptoms that looked just like lead poisoning. He had these purple lines along his gums. He had abnormal blood chemistries, and I thought, wow, this is classic lead poisoning. But it wasn't, it was selenium overdose. I was lucky enough to have done a test that also had selenium, and he had way too much. So it's a real problem, I've been aware of that. And in the recent past, it has occurred, and those who developed it, yes, they've had hair loss and other skin problems. It's occurred in the last few decades only from poorly manufactured vitamins. So there was a few batches that came out that had just way more selenium than they were supposed to. And in those cases, people tragically had rapid and complete hair loss. It wasn't the kind of stuff that I do when I'm looking in the mirror and wondering if, is it thinning more? No, it was like, boom, gone. So it was a big deal. And they were sick in other ways. Thankfully, it was promptly identified, and by and large, they did get better. Now, there is also this thing called paradise nuts, and these do come from South America. And there have been some cases in which they have caused selenosis and some of the complications of selenosis. Paradise nuts are not available for commercial sale in the United States, and they're not the same as Brazil nuts. They're completely different plants. We now know that they also contain different types of selenium. So this is pretty wild. They contain a version called selenocystathione, and that's different from the selenocysteine found in Brazil nuts. Yes, selenocystathione. And there have been documented cases of hair loss after ingesting as few as 7 of these paradise nuts. So they're pretty much like selenium growing on a stem. And yeah, they're toxic. So if you ever stumble across them, if in your travels, don't eat them. Bad idea. And the thought though about Brazil nuts has been, they've shown that they're rich in selenium, they're well absorbed. The range can be as much as 7 to 200 micrograms per nut. Most are about 25 micrograms. And there have been the blogs I mentioned saying that they could be dangerous. So I currently suggest 2 to 4 per day as a good option. And here's one of the studies that really caused my views about Brazil nuts to change and make me feel less wary of them. So this was a study done appropriately enough in Brazil. And they took a large group of children that were preschool age, and these were kids that were in a very impoverished area. They were somewhat malnourished to begin with. They had likely micronutrient deficiencies. They were slow as far as their growth is concerned. They were showing signs of malnutrition, and they weren't healthy kids. And in the study, they took one identical group of kids and didn't change their diets, just watched them. Another group of kids, they gave pretty high amounts of Brazil nuts. And they watched their health in a lot of ways. They also measured their selenium in a lot of ways. And by a lot of Brazil nuts, I mean a lot. If you were to convert what these kids ate into an adult dose, it would be like up to 32 Brazil nuts a day for an adult. They're big nuts. They're like way bigger than almonds. It was about a 20% to 30% of these children's calories were coming from Brazil nuts. But they didn't just raise the total food intake, they replaced it. Now what happened was, compared to their peers that were not being given Brazil nuts, these kids flourished. They showed many improvements of their health, their immune function, their antioxidant capacity, and their selenium markers were fascinating. So you can measure selenium in the blood, the urine, the hair, the nails. As a generalization, your body works hard to keep the blood levels steady. So if you ever get too much, you'll keep the blood level steady as much as you can, but the extra will leave in all those other tissues. So the urine, the nails, the hair, they might be higher as the body's excreting selenium, but the blood will stay steady when it can. In cases of toxicosis, like with the paradise nuts, there's so much you can't get it out fast enough, and the blood levels also get high. So these kids that were like living on Brazil nuts, their blood levels of selenium were great. They were fine. They were right where they should have been, not even a little bit too high. They were better than they were before the study. Their levels of selenium in their urine and their hair and their nails were quite high. So their body was dumping out the excess. And we now know that the main version, chemical form of selenium in Brazil nuts, is that selenocysteine that I mentioned. And that's one that our bodies can get rid of as need be. So you will get variable amounts in Brazil nuts, but by and large, your body can sort the rest of that out. The other interesting point is that Brazil nuts have been shown to be beneficial in ways that you might not get by just selenium from other foods or even selenium from supplements. So studies have shown specifically that those who are lower in selenium, they can get better benefits from Brazil nuts than they can by supplementation or from other food sources. And those that don't have overt deficiencies, adding a few per day, no drawbacks to that. So yeah, if one is concerned about hair loss, think about other causes, but don't be wary about Brazil nuts as far as being a culprit. They're safe foods. Add 2 to 4 in per day and enjoy them. They work. Yeah, you can't totally explain their effects by just the selenium amount. Some studies have shown that they do things that you couldn't explain by it alone. So good foods, great to include, and frankly, no concerns about that at those ranges at all. The kids were taking way more than that. The study, I'm glad we have the data, but if someone were to ask me if that study was a good idea, I would have encouraged them not to do it. I didn't know what the outcome would have been. I wasn't as clear about the forms of selenium. I don't think anyone was as clear as how it would play out. And now we know that. It's good to know, but yeah, they shouldn't have done that. But nonetheless, we have that benefit. So we know that Brazil nuts are safe foods. All right, Dr. C with you. Take great care, and I'll see you real soon.